Good morning. I'm Mark Harkenny, the Senior Manager for Government Initiatives with ACT-IAC, and I'd like to thank you all for joining us for today's webinar on Disruptive Federal DevOps 2.0, sponsored by Salient CRGT and VMware. Today's webinar will feature a discussion about Federal DevOps 2.0 and will feature lessons learned from early Federal DevOps adopters and the advantage of next-generation solutions, supporting DevOps transformation and adoption in months rather than years. For those of you who have joined us in the past, thanks for your attendance again, and for those of you who are new, welcome. Our distinguished speakers for today's presentation are retired Colonel Aaron Swain, DoD IC Director of Customer Success at VMware, and Mikey Mccormack, DoD Intel Delivery at VMware. Our moderator for today's discussion is Eric Kersals, the Chief Technology Officer and Senior Vice President at Salient CRGT. Before we begin, I'd like to ask you all to feel free to submit your questions using the Q&A box on your screen. Our moderator, Eric Kersals, will be curating questions for us at the end of the presentation. Additionally, there are two resizable boxes on your screen that show today's slides and presenters. Feel free to manipulate those boxes to fit your preferences. Finally, this presentation is being recorded and will be made available for review in the coming days. With all that said, thanks again to our sponsors, Salient CRGT and VMware, and I'll turn it over to you, Eric. Thanks.
Hey, thank you, Mark. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really excited you could join us for this virtual session. You know, despite all of our Monday workloads and the trials and tribulations of working remotely, you know, you found time to join us, and we're appreciative of that. So I'd ask that everyone do ask questions today. You know, we really want this to be for you, and we want it to be valuable for you, and so that means you know, please help us adjust the topics and the flow so we can answer all your questions, and we'll stay on through the end to answer as many questions as we can get to today. I'm Eric Kersals, Chief Technology Officer for the Health and Civilian Sector at Salient CRGT. We're a mid-sized federal integrator. We serve numerous agencies on their DevOps journeys. And you know, with a lot of time that we dedicate to each customer, our Digital Services Innovation Center has collaborated across government, really over the last decade on every aspect of Agile DevSecOps adoption. And one thing that I've really seen, and this is over the last 12 months, I'd say, is some radical change in what's available to federal customers. Really, that's why we're here today, to share those ideas with you. And you know, we know that our audience has a wide range of DevSecOps expertise, from early adopters who were there from the first days and struggled through many of the pains and tribulations to get the DevOps prize, to some customers who perhaps had a pilot or two and are now getting serious in their journey. And you know, we'd hope to have something for each of those audiences, and we're very hopeful that we'll have at least one or two ideas or suggestions that might save you some time and help you avoid a landmine. So fortunate today to have two of the DevOps pioneers as our panelists. And I think what's interesting, which I find interesting, is that one presents a customer perspective of DevSecOps adoption, and the other an implementer perspective. So with our customer view, we welcome Colonel Aaron Swain, retired, now a Director of Customer Success at VMware. Colonel Swain retired from the JSOC, the Joint Special Operations Command, where he really built a startup to insource mission-critical ops systems. You know, in that role, he was one of the first DevSecOps movers within the Special Forces, and he worked with Pivotal Labs as a customer stakeholder to accelerate that early adoption. He's held numerous leadership roles throughout the Army, most notably as a mathematics instructor at U.S. Military Academy West Point, also a deputy director of the Afghanistan Assessment Group. With the implementer view, we have Mikey Mccormack, currently with DoD Intel Delivery at VMware. Mikey was a key Pivotal Labs leader on the Kessel Run system of systems. And in that role, he's proud to have actually written the first line of code there. He crafts and leads today service transformation strategies for the DoD and Intel community as a member of VMware's Federal Services Leadership Team. And he holds a degree in electrical engineering and computer science from UC Berkeley. So thank you, gentlemen, for joining us today, and we really look forward to the discussion. Going to the slides, and I let's see. Let me just forward this. I apologize, I didn't flip this at the right time. So here's here's who we are, and you'll see us, of course, on video as well. And let's cover a few ground rules. So please expect this to be an unvarnished discussion, not a sales pitch. That's what we want to do today, and this is unrehearsed. So what you're getting is the thoughts and observations of some pioneers in DevOps. Colonel Swain and Mikey really have full license to speak freely, and we know that you'll hear a lot of candid discussion. As we've said repeatedly, please submit questions. Thank you already. Somebody said thank you for this learning today, but I'll be watching the question box and trying to interject the questions as they come up. In some cases, if the flow is going a different direction, I might save the question for the end. And so we'll leave some time at the end for additional questions.
Awesome.
And with that, I'd like to get started. So here are the three main topics today. You'll see at the top. So Federal DevOps 2.0, transformation to a DevOps culture, and also some of the best practices that go along with that, and then tools and more tools. So let's get started. The first generation adopters, have really paved the way for some of us who have come later. And what we see now is federal DevOps is really going mainstream. So, I know from an integrator perspective, there's no RFP that I pick up that doesn't have, that's not looking really for a DevSecOps adoption journey or recommendations in our proposals. And so I know that that's clearly the case now. And when you were starting out, it probably wasn't the case. So from a customer and an implementer perspective, tell us about some of the challenges of being an early adopter.
Aaron? Yeah, cool. I'll start. Challenge of becoming an early adopter. I think the biggest challenge is actually just getting started. Everyone thinks where I was at the Joint Special Operations Command, you got these big digital globes where you can just see what's going on everywhere. And, there's so many movies are out there of incredible technologies. Unfortunately, that is not the case. And folks are fighting the war off of a lot of Microsoft products. I think that the biggest challenge against just getting started was just taking that first step to get going and convincing decision makers it's really worth the risk. Fortunately, we kind of had a real forward-thinking leader at the time in our commanding general, and he kind of saw that the battlefield or even the world everyone lives in nowadays is digital, and so we needed to kind of insource that and make our operators digitally enabled. So he saw us kind of bringing DevSecOps into the command as the first step in educating our folks how to kind of do things ourselves.
I want to make sure I got the question here. It's like, what is hard about being a pioneer in DevSecOps or in DevOps? Is that correct?
That's correct. But let's take it a little further. And if you'd like to elaborate a little bit about what it was like 3 to 5 years ago, and now knowing what you know today, what makes DevOps 2.0 different from DevOps 1.0? What were some of the challenges from back then that perhaps wouldn't have been as hard today?
Sure. Yeah, I got 3 words written down here. 1 is security, 2 is waterfall, 3 is tools. And I'm not sure if I want to take them in that order. Let me do them out of order here. So we are kind of moving as an industry away from this waterfall approach of building software the way that big planes and skyscrapers and big metal objects are built, which is you gather requirements, you do a big system diagram, you build the thing, you certify the thing, you release the thing, and all that happens over the course of many years. When we started to move in the direction of DevOps, we kind of never got away from that world. We were like, okay, we're going to do DevOps, but we're still going to do it in the construct of gathering requirements up front, doing a big architecture up front. Then we're going to do Agile. Then we're going to test it all. Then we're going to release it all. And we're stuck with the same timelines we had before. So that's the kind of first problem, is like getting away from the waterfall mindset and stepping into an unknown world of Agile and DevOps. Second thing is, when you actually go to release a piece of software, any piece of software, whether you're going to release it in 2 weeks or in 2 years or in 2 decades, you have to get through the accreditation process. And accreditation is hard, and it is meant to hold you back from getting to production. And so solving the accreditation process is another thing that had to get done to move from 1 to 2. And then the last thing is the tools. Like tools, when you're just getting started, are just like a bunch of impediments. It's like you're gluing together a bunch of things that are supposed to act as one seamless unit, but they don't. And so getting all of the tools to get orchestrated in a way that they become invisible and become supporters of a DevOps pipeline path to production was not really there 5 years ago, and it's there today.
Thank you. So let's talk a little bit about about some of those challenges. Before we get to Nirvana, where did some of the practices and tools let you down back then? What were some of the experiences that you learned from? What were some of your worst experiences?
Yeah, can I start with that one, Mikey? There's all kinds of practices, methods that are out there. Pivotal Labs teaches one of those or a couple of those, and like user-centered design, lean startup, and extreme programming. When we kind of graduated from Pivotal Labs, we started a different practice called SAFE, and that really slowed teams down a ton, because what it kind of did is everyone kind of stopped working for a couple of weeks and like planned out what they're going to do next, which is kind of like opposite of extreme programming, where your engineers are never stopping and you've got folks in the team that allow you to kind of keep moving because they're always engaging users and moving ahead. And so I think that's one of our lessons learned is, I don't know a ton about SAFE, but I know the way we try to practice SAFE did not work. It gave middle managers excuses to generate their own requirements without engaging with the users. And the second on the tools piece is we try to build our own platform. Kubernetes is free. It's open source, and you can just kind of download that. But when we started doing that, I think JSOC is still trying to do that. It does not, once again, it really slows you down, and it is not at all the same as some of those products you can buy, from other vendors. But our offering is called Tanzu.
Let me take a stab at this as well. Several years ago, and this was true in the commercial world as well, I, as a software engineer, I can hang out in my basement and write a really awesome application. And I can probably do that in a weekend, as a lot of engineers like to say. I could just do that in a weekend. Problem is, when you want to put that piece of software onto an enterprise network, fully accredited, running in production, all of a sudden, the real work begins. 99% of the work is like getting through all the wickets and security processes and verification, validation, everything to actually get your software running in a production environment. That was true in commercial. It's true in federal. We struggled with it for years until we started to solve this continuous authority to operate with Kessel Run. And now, by abstracting away many of the security requirements by putting in place an infrastructure as a service and a platform as a service that is turnkey, fully automated, globally consistent. Now, the number of security requirements that engineers have to go through to get your code that you built in a weekend into a production environment is minimal. And so now we can push code to production in less than 30 days from the start of a project. So and that's a function of two things. It's a function of fixing the security process to go from the old world of like having to do V&V and an ATO process that takes many months to doing a continuous authority to operate with substrates that you're validating with inheritance, and then a platform that solves that for you. That's, to me, the going from the old world to the new world. So that was what we struggled with before. Not being able to get to production, and then just struggling with trying to actually deploy onto bare metal or some weird cloud environment that's not ready for cloud native code.
Mikey, actually, when we actually started doing that at JSOC, we've actually found that we're actually more secure in doing that because all the tools we're using, scanning tools, were much better than what we had on the DoD systems to scan. And so, those tools were continually being updated, where the ones we had to go through their own ATO process. And so you're stuck, generations behind.
Yeah, once we landed a fully automated turnkey platform, coupled with that inheritance model and a continuous ATO, was when we started pushing actual mission capabilities to production environments literally in days, over and over and over and over again. We've now done it like 60 times since mid-2016.
Great. Hey, so, what do your experiences tell you then in terms of priority of focus? If obviously there were some missteps in trying to solve the problem organizationally with some organizational constructs that didn't work with SAFE. So what should be done first? What are your priorities to get DevSecOps going if you're just really starting your investment?
Yeah, I think I would almost do the same way we did it, where we had a business or a mission problem that we just couldn't stand anymore. The certain one we dealt with was like mission reporting. Like, if someone asks you a question, what'd you do 3 years ago on this day in this part of the globe, and that's like a research project, pulling up a PST file, that's probably something you probably are wasting time doing. And so, yeah, find the most critical problem you have, one that's probably very manual. You toss a lot of people at it to solve, a lot of money to solve, and then go ahead and try something different. And good chances are it's going to work.
Yeah. So Mikey,
go ahead.
Mike, I was going to ask how do you apply your best practice? What do you do first, right?
Yeah. I think in analogies, and the analogy that's popping into my head right now is like, so you want to go climb Everest. Okay. One way to do that is to sit and read a zillion books on mountain climbing and then practice mountaineering for 10 years and then go plan out a whole trip and like do the whole thing from scratch. And then one day, maybe in 15 years, you'll summit Everest. Or you contact a set of Sherpas that live out there that do this for a living and have them help you get to the top of the mountain. And in the process of taking you to the top, professionals that do it every day, you will learn to summit Everest, and you do it much faster than kind of reinventing it on your own. So that's kind of one way that I would say you do it. And then I would just echo what Aaron said, which is you start with a mission problem that you can solve with software, as opposed to saying, I want to be able to do agile software delivery, so let me go out and do a tools trade study and build out a whole bunch of infrastructure here. And then in a few years, once I've got all the foundation laid out, we can go build software. Do it in the other direction. Work with Sherpas that can take you to the top of the mountain and have a reason to go there, so that it forces you to take the most optimal route to the top, as opposed to planning out all the different trips you could take.
And Mikey, when we all came to y'all, it wasn't like, hey, we're going to revolutionize how everyone in JSOC either gets or uses software. It was like, hey, let's just try this out. And so we literally sent like 3 platform operators. We put together a 3-person CI/CD team, and we sent a team of 5, actually 2 pivotal labs to get going. So we just aligned, what is that, like less than 10 folks against a critical business problem, and we tried to solve it. And what we found is we actually solved it.
Let me, I love the Everest example. I think that's gonna stick in my head. But let me challenge you to take it a step further. So, so we heard the analogy about your lone mountaineer with or a couple with their Sherpas. So how do I get the whole expedition aligned if I'm a typical federal customer with large scale programs, 200 applications and who knows how many organizing, who knows how many teams, right? So how do I get the expedition aligned? And I think that shifts the conversation a little bit as well into the culture, right? So DevOps culture and practices in the federal world, require some special techniques, I think, that you all have helped lead. So what could you say about bringing the whole expedition along? How would you tackle that?
I would start with a small problem that is acute, that a user is having, not some set of functional requirements that you gathered years ago, but find a mission owner with a problem that is intolerable, that they want to get solved right now, and put a small team around that and empower them to build out the tools they need to address that problem today. And then the objective is to try to get a feedback loop established where you are talking to users who have the problems. You are turning those user feedback bits into priorities for your team to work on, to engineers building it, to it getting accredited and fielded into a production environment literally in hours, putting it back in the hands of users, and then getting their feedback, prioritizing the next thing, building it, getting it accredited, putting it into production, into the hands of the user, and getting that feedback loop, that flywheel, spinning as early as you can, as fast as you can. And then once you have that little seed and it's spinning very rapidly, you can then double that effort. And then you can triple that effort, and you scale it out exponentially. So it seems from the start, especially coming from an enterprise perspective, like, oh, wait a minute, you're telling me I got to start small? Like, I got 800 people over here that need to, roll out. What am I supposed to do with those other, 795 people if you're telling me to start with 5? But it's very hard to get a group of 800 people in an enterprise organization to all move en masse and create a culturally lasting, great DevSecOps environment. It's much easier to start with a small team and then isolate them, empower them, and then indoctrinate more and more people into that and grow it in that way. And you'll actually get more stable more quickly doing it in that way. So start with an acute mission problem, empower the teams to choose the tools they need to get to production rapidly, let them talk to end users and get that feedback loop going, and then grow it.
Yeah, if I could just add there, Mikey, you talked about culture, empowering the team to actually solve the problem themselves. And then as a leader, to remove all their blockers, or do whatever you can to move all those blockers. A team that feels empowered this way can accomplish great things. And I've seen it.
So let me ask this, I know a lot of our customers are saying, well, I think they may be saying, it's theoretically, it'd be great to slow roll this, but I need it now, right? I mean, my 800-person organization can't wait 3 years. So how quickly can I roll it out to the whole enterprise? And what kind of, and how do I build out sort of governance as I go?
Let me take a stab at this. So in a world in which you really do have to move out 800 people, then I think what you need is a platform that can host software workloads in a globally consistent, fully automated, turnkey way. Without that, it is Wild West, and everybody's going to be struggling with the infrastructure. And we go right back to DevOps 1.0. So start with a globally consistent DevOps pipeline and platform running in a multi-cloud, hybrid cloud way, and then establish pipelines that handle accreditation of any software that gets built by any of your 800 people, so that what you've put in place effectively is a governance structure, or I'll call it a gauntlet, and an environment that that smooths over all of the various inconsistencies that will exist. And now any engineering team that wants to work and solve part of the problem for their part of the enterprise can do so using that pipeline and that platform. You're automating out the infrastructure, and you're automating out the path to production, and you're automating out the authority to operate. I think that is effectively the only way that you're going to get an organization like that to move that fast, that quickly. Makes sense.
So what when you went through the Kessel Run experience, and sort of what it did for the DevOps culture, can you give us a little more of a deep dive into some of the practices? What is it about Kessel Run that made it more effective, and tell us a little more about Pivotal Labs too, if you would.
Yeah, sure. So think of our company as we kind of bring two things to bear to help organizations be great at modern software. The first is a set of techniques, a set of practices, a way of thinking about software. And then the second is a piece of software that abstracts away all the complexities of running on modern infrastructure, hybrid cloud, multi-cloud, all of that. So basically, any software running on any device, on any network, is solved by this half of our organization. And then the other half of the organization is, okay, given you have that, what is the art of the possible when you really lean forward on doing modern practices, modern software culture? So Pivotal Labs is the modern culture piece that depends on that modern infrastructure. So I'll talk about the modern practices. And actually, let's go to slide 12 here. I'll do it. So this is effectively how we build software. This is the way Silicon Valley builds software. So you see a triangle there. And that triangle is sitting atop what I'm calling VMware's Tanzu multi-cloud DevSecOps toolchain. So think of that toolchain as the infrastructure that has to exist that I mentioned previously. If you're going to want to get 800 people in an enterprise to move quickly, you need that toolchain to exist to automate and make consistent all of your infrastructure so that that triangle can rest on top. And so what Pivotal Labs brings to bear is effectively 3 software disciplines that work together on what we call a balanced team. And that balanced team is 3 separate disciplines that show up and sit together and work together all day, every day, fully empowered to solve user problems, and they push that software onto that globally consistent DevSecOps toolchain. So those 3 disciplines are, I mentioned a few minutes ago that really the objective is to get a flywheel cranking that takes user feedback and turns it into code that's running in production fully accredited. The faster you can get that going, the better off you are. So we have users in our equation. We have designers practicing user-centered design whose job is to empathize with and get into the heads of the end user. They literally, their job is to develop a close relationship with the end user, talk to them all day, every day, find out what their favorite breakfast cereal is, how many kids they have, where they went to school, what their hopes and fears are. And then they take that and they build out a vision in the form of a user experience, a UI, UX vision. And they then hand that vision up to a product manager who's practicing something called lean startup. And the lean startup is just the scientific method applied to software. I have a hypothesis that by building this particular next set of capability, I will achieve Y result, and I'm going to know whether or not I'm doing it because I'm measuring some metric Z. So they're taking the vision from the designers who are talking to the users. They are prioritizing the work based off of the next hypothesis, and then they hand that priority list down to the engineers. And the engineers pair program and test drive their way toward making that next slice of functionality work, and then they push it through an automated gauntlet called our CI/CD pipeline, which has automated tests and automated scans to get continuous authority to operate, and then push it into that DevSecOps toolchain. Once it's landing in production, the users get access to the code, and the designers, again, pick up the ball. They talk to the users, hey, we developed that next slice of functionality for you. What did you think of that? How did you interact with that software? What do you need next? What is the next biggest pain point that you have? And then they take that, build it into a UI, UX vision, hand it up to a product manager practicing lean startup who comes up with the next hypothesis and how they're going to validate it. They prioritize that, hand it to engineers that pair program and test drive that next slice of functionality, push it through the pipeline, back into production. That is how we build software. That is how Silicon Valley builds software. Teams might take slightly different shapes, whether you're looking at Spotify or Google or Facebook, but roughly speaking, this is the way Silicon Valley builds software. This is the way we build software. This is the way we enable organizations we work with to build software.
Let me follow up a little bit, and also, Aaron, I'll ask you to provide your perspective of, especially from your customer days, of how this engagement looked. And I'd like to get into some of the tactics, and really what the question might be is, okay, so Pivotal Labs is an instrument to bring together a combined team of contractor, government to make this work. Is it something that can be done in a typical 60-day contract transition to a new provider, for example? How long does it take, and And from a customer perspective, how did it manifest? Right? I mean, did you go to a location to do this? And I think Mikey, you and Aaron had a chance to engage for the first time as customer and implementer. So I'd love to hear about the tactics of how this worked.
Yeah, man, I could dive into some of this. So my team was all kind of, we started with military folks, but quickly learned that we didn't have enough military folks. We brought in a whole bunch of contractors. As I look across all of our programs now in Pivotal Labs, it's absolutely a mix. Some teams are all contracts, a couple government, some are a little more government. It's kind of come one, come all, but I don't think it really matters a ton, just as long as folks kind of have the empathy and want to learn how to build software this way. As far as the platform goes, those guys need to kind of live with where your network is. And so our platform guys lived on classified networks. Pivotal set some folks to kind of pair with them for a couple months, and they grabbed the ball and ran from there. For the folks that were learning to develop software, we kind of started with engineers who were brand new engineers. And so we spent a long time in Pivotal Labs, about 6 months inside of Pivotal Labs. I've seen some shorter, I've seen some longer. I think Mike could probably be a little better to talk about what's the best length of time based upon the skills that folks are kind of bringing to bear.
Yeah, if I'm understanding the question, Eric, it's kind of like everything we just talked about for the last half an hour. Like, okay, how do we orchestrate that to really demonstrate the art of the possible in this new DevOps paradigm? Is that correct?
Yeah, the question is really, so if I'm thinking, hey, Pivotal Labs is interesting, but how do I get some of it? I'm not really prepared to be out on the extremes of Kessel Run, right? And to sort of do everything that Kessel Run was, but I know that it really generates some great results. I've got some contracts coming up, and I want them to be DevSecOps enabled. Can I allow providers to bid a Pivotal Story, for example, that has a transition period where there's a chance for the teams to work together with Pivotal Labs coaching and make this work? How does it work tactically?
Yeah. So, the Kessel Run thing was interesting. Nobody, at least I did not anticipate what it was going to become. And what it became was like 1,200 airmen and women working in Boston, creating a software company inside of the Air Force. Are we anticipating there being a 1,200 GS civilian workforce inside of the Treasury? I don't know, maybe, but probably not. So what does this sort of future look like in a world in which we're not going to replicate what Kessel Run did? I really think it boils down to demonstrating what is possible when you take the practices and the tools and you put them together in a way, just like a Sherpa knows how to take you to Everest safely and quickly, successfully. Work with an organization that can demonstrate for you the art of the possible when you get all the dials turned up to 11. And then once you do that, what you'll have in the end is effectively a continuous ATO memo accredited. You will have a pipeline built out that can take any workload and run it through a gauntlet into production. You will have a globally consistent production environment, tool chain, platforms, all of that, fully accredited running. And you will have a mission problem solved with production software in the hands of end users that demonstrates what is actually possible when you really turn all those knobs up to 11. You do that over the course of, I don't know, call it a 3 to 9 month engagement with us. And then you kind of have a few choices after that. You can either take what you got, which is the pipeline, the processes, a few people enabled, a continuous ATO, everything accredited, and then you can go bring contractors in, or you can split and mitose and scale out your organization the same way. Sort of what I would advocate for is effectively one engagement that's on the order of about 6 months with a mission problem, and you bring these practices and these tools together in a way that everybody's fully empowered to do it for real. And then from there, you've got the pipeline, you've got the practices, you've got the accreditation piece. You can bring in contractors and you just hold them accountable to developing in that same way on that platform with that ATO. Does that answer your question? Is that my pitch and strikes there with?
No, I think it does. We have a follow-up question actually that's approached. And there are a few other questions, by the way, that have come up, but I'm going to hold those for the end as we go through the flow. This follow-up though is directly related, and I'll read it because it's kind of amusing. But if I don't want to go to Pivotal Sleepaway Camp, can I do it in-house?
Nothing that we do is proprietary. Everything that we do is best practices, and so you can practice those best practices on your own in your living room, or you can come to Pivotal Labs and do it. The benefit of coming to a place like Pivotal Labs is that people on this call, if you've seen that show, the Dog Whisperer, that guy Cesar Millan, who goes to people's houses and he tries to help their dogs when they've got problems or whatever. And then every once in a while he comes across a dog that he can't solve their barking problem at the house in his client's living room. So he takes the dog and he brings that dog back to his compound where he's got 40 really well-behaved dogs. And there's a culture among all the dogs. There's a pack mentality there where the minute you bring that dog with whatever behavior it has and you drop it into that environment, guest mentality kicks in, the pack mentality kicks in, and that dog instantly transforms. That's the benefit of coming to a place like Pivotal Labs, is you get all of the cultural elements imposed on you so that you kind of have no choice but to work in the most optimal way. Now, can you do it in your home station? Absolutely. There's nothing about what we do that's proprietary, but there is a benefit to coming to us.
Thanks, Mikey.
Can I just follow up on that real fast?
Yeah,
I think part of it is, I think the benefit for us coming to Pivotal Labs is these people came from all different parts of the organization. And so if we had tried to do it in a home station, just getting them all together to work in the same area using these different kind of methodologies really wouldn't have worked, because they would have been doing part of their old job, part of their new job, and I don't think they would have just been able to focus on the problem. So part of the benefit of being able to take them out of that environment, kind of doing their old jobs, is now, hey guys, you're now working on this thing, that's all you're working on. Yeah. I can't tell you how many different problems you're working at once in the federal government. I can probably fingers, toes, and even hair follicles, the number of problems I would work on a daily basis. And so kind of the way that we were able to focus on just one is pull these people out, send them away, and they did that. Now also we have another offering called kind of app transformation, which is when we kind of go into your place, learn about a kind of a legacy application you have, work with your team to then modernize it. So we do it in your own location, and we do it inside of Pivotal Labs.
Okay, thank you all. I want to take a little time, I'm just conscious of time. We've got about 22 minutes left. We said we'd talk a little bit about tools. So let's spend a little time there before we entertain some more questions. I think it's fair to say that the first generation adopters are really sometimes facing a tools conundrum or a tools overflow. A lot of licensing, a lot of integration requirements. That CI/CD pipeline can sound a lot simpler than it is to actually make work. And it changes constantly, right? I mean, as all these integrations are required. So tell me a little about your experiences with tool integration, and I'll ask a sort of multi-part question. So, first off, I guess, what are your experience with the evolution of tools to DevOps 2.0? And then tell us more about how should the tools team kind of fit in organizationally within an optimal team?
I don't know if I'm going to answer your question here, but I'll try. A few years ago, Pivotal Labs as an organization worked with just startups out in Silicon Valley. And what we found is that we could disrupt the Fortune 50 space pretty easily by just applying our practices and not really worrying about a lot of infrastructure, because we could just swipe a credit card and push our apps into the cloud, and it was just kind of easy. But the minute we turned to working with enterprises, all of a sudden we were going up against a lot of bureaucratic constraints, ATOs and things like that, and running, applications globally consistent, at scale with auto failover, high availability. All of a sudden it becomes very, very difficult. And so an engineering team that's kind of going up against all of that stops working on business problems, stops working on user problems, and starts working on infrastructure. And all of a sudden, you kind of lift your head up after 6 months and you realize you haven't gotten anything done except wiring up plumbing. So that was what years ago looked like. Today, it looks like I want to basically push a button and get in a self-service way all that global consistency, all that high availability, all that scale, all that accreditation, so I can just go back to focusing on the business problem. Where a tools team fits is kind of in the overlap. There's a Venn diagram between the cloud infrastructure, the edge compute, and the development teams that depend on that to push workloads that solve user business mission problems. There is a tool chain and a set of tools that provide a set of shared services with an SLA to that development team. And I would argue that that tools team has to sit literally right between those two organizations and probably have representatives from both of those organizations who can show up to the table building out the tools that represent the development teams as users of the infrastructure and as infrastructure people who are building out that infrastructure to meet the requirements from the users, the development teams, to talk feasibility. So I think that the tools team belongs right between the two. Where I think we get into trouble is when we take our infrastructure or tool chain teams and we separate them very far away from the development team. What we're basically doing is taking the word DevOps, which is one word, and we are dividing it into two words and saying dev is going to live over here, and then ops is going to live in another city over there on a different time zone. And when you want to get something from the ops team, you're going to submit a ticket, and it's going to take 2 weeks. Somebody's going to misunderstand it. Ticket's going to get closed, and the development team is going to be frustrated, and then the end user and the mission doesn't get its problem solved. So they got to be together, and that overlap, you should have representatives from both teams working together on the tools.
How do I do it in a big organization, right? So I'm on the Everest expedition again, and everybody's going to go off to summit from their different countries. And, how much governance do I want to apply? Does everyone leave at the same time, because there's there's a trade-off. And I know that a lot of our customers are facing this because they don't want to inhibit creativity and teams to tailor their approaches and their tools to a specific problem, yet they don't want every tool, they don't want every tool in the book in their enterprise. So what's a good balance for governance? What are some considerations for that large organization in terms of the tool, especially in terms of tools?
I think my answer is maybe not going to satisfy you. I think I would go back to what I said previously, which is that it's very difficult to get an organization of 800 people to move on a dime to build out the kind of infrastructure needed for a development team to do DevOps in the most radically optimized way. To allow a dev team to move it the most radically optimized way, they need to kind of have access to the tools themselves so they can choose the right ones for them to do their job today, as opposed to submitting tickets and firing them over the internet to some governance body that determines whether or not you get those tools, or you get those tools with those configurations, or if you get abstracted away in some way. So I would argue it is take that 800-person organization and separate out a group of people and make that your small DevOps organization that is fully empowered and has access to any of the tools they need to solve their mission problem for their users, and then iterate and bring in new teams and grow it organically and exponentially over time. That's my answer. And frankly, I just think that we are in research territory here. I'd ask anybody on this call who's got the correct answer to this. I don't think it's anybody. And so the best we've got right now is to create centers of excellence that are isolated from the bureaucratic environment that they work within, empower them and then learn from them, and then support them in their own growth, and then bring in more people into that environment. I think it's a lot easier to grow a brand new cultural element inside of a blank slate. We start small and grow it, than it is to take an organization of 1,000 people and say, I'm going to write a bunch of documentation for how we're going to incrementally get you from where you are now to some better state. It's really hard to go from 1 to 2, but it's very easy to just start with a blank slate and just create the art of the possible demonstration of 2. And then bring in people.
Great. That's good. Thank you. Tell us a little bit about Tanzu. I know there's been a lot of investment in the offering, and one of the things, frankly, is from an integrator perspective that caught our attention was discussion about the armies of DevOps engineers, which we're familiar with, that it takes sometimes to build the CI/CD pipeline. And I know Tanzu has some interesting approaches to tackle that problem. Can you give us a quick pitch on what it is?
Yeah, let me try this, and then Aaron, you take a stab. So
I think we have a slide about this, right? I think it's like slide 8 or something.
Yeah. Sorry, you drive. So the dream is that your tools are for your development team that is building software that meets a mission need. The goal is really to be able to meet that mission need anywhere on the planet in a high availability way, running any workload on any device, on any cloud, in the edge, fully automated, turnkey, globally consistent. That's the dream. So I, as a software engineer that's solving a business problem or a mission problem for an end user, doesn't have to wrestle with my infrastructure, doesn't have to go choose and wire together a bunch of plumbing. I just get it. And that was kind of the dream of Silicon Valley in 2010. Was like 2 kids in a garage can swipe a credit card and eat a Subway sandwich and go compete with JP Morgan for market share. And it's because they are benefiting from the work of thousands of engineers at organizations like Microsoft or Amazon or Apple or Google. Imagine a world where those 2 kids in a garage that want to build Wealthfront and go compete with JP Morgan, the first thing those 2 engineers have to go do is hire 10,000 infrastructure engineers to go figure out what tools they're going to use and then wire them up into a globally consistent infrastructure and platform so that I can then try out my startup. That would be crazy. Those businesses would never succeed. And given we want to take that same idea and apply it to the federal government, you need to take that same approach. You need to have somebody else do all the work of building out that globally consistent infrastructure where any workload can run on any device, anywhere, at any network level, with full authority to operate all of that easily, so that the Treasury, so that the Department of Homeland Security can effectively take a small team of engineers and go solve a real, headline-making mission problem on the order of days. So Tanzu is that. It is a hybrid cloud, multi-cloud platform that provides the ability for development teams to run any workload on any device, on any cloud, anywhere on the planet, globally consistent, fully automated, with high availability. So that you can get back to focusing not on tools, because the users and the mission doesn't care what tools you used. The user and the mission cares how quickly you're going to get that next feature out. So Tanzu gives you all of that stuff as a platform that solves all of that infrastructure complexity problem for your development teams, so your development teams can get back to the business of being development teams.
Yeah, so as a customer, I can talk about why I chose, then Pivotal, now Tanzu, is we didn't have a ton of developers. And so the question was where do I want to focus those guys? Back-end architecture or delivering what actually solves the business problem? And so it was a real easy decision for me. It was, let's solve the business problem and let's go pay someone else to develop a platform. And then what I heard is, the developers just loved working with that because they didn't have to worry about a lot of the stuff that didn't deliver the mission value that they were learning how to deliver.
Yeah, a lot of organizations will say, well, I don't really know. I don't know if I want to use this Tanzu thing, or maybe I want to use some other, off-the-shelf platform technology or whatever. But actually, you know what I instead want to do is go build it myself. And you get back into the business of reinventing something that has already been invented and perfected. And you're wasting all of your talent reinventing the wheel. And then, maybe you'll solve a mission problem in a few years if you're lucky. But most likely, you're going to spend the rest of your time reinventing a technology that you could have just benefited from the thousands of engineers that are building that for all of the customers of that technology. And then you could just get back to the business of building code to solve mission problems. So Tanzu has, I don't know what the number of engineers it is, but it's like thousands of engineers are working on building the next capability every day onto the Tanzu platform, so that you don't have to do that. Let us do that. Pay a small price to benefit from that, and then have your folks focus on solving mission problems with software.
And you're talking about, the investment is, because there's a lot of companies putting, with hundreds of engineers building out tool capabilities. But I think one of the differences is just the degree of integration that's built in right out of the box. Is that fair? Can you talk to that just a bit?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So, if I wish I had the slide here, but it's like the number of individual tools that have come out and continue to come out in the last few years that all need to get wired together to provide that global consistency, that turnkey experience, that beautiful developer experience where you just finish the next line of code for your mission and then you push it seamlessly into this CI/CD pipeline and it just gracefully goes into production. Like how that actually happens is a mountain of individual tools and technologies. And what Tanzu gives you is all of that wired up in a way that it is just seamless. Like imagine if the next time you wanted to go take a ride in your car, you had to go out to the garage and pick a bunch of metal off the ground and weld it together into a car. When would you actually go buy groceries?
I love your analogies, by the way. This is
like now imagine that you've got like the ability to just swipe, on your iPhone, go out to the next like car that you can just like, click on your iPhone and the car unlocks and you just go for a drive. You drop it off anywhere you want it. Like that's the dream. That's what Tanzu provides. But it involves somebody had to weld all those parts together. Somebody had to brand that car. You don't have to do that. You gotta go pick up groceries.
Thank you.
Yes.
So a couple questions about with customers who've already made significant investments in having at least a Volkswagen camper that gets out of the garage already. Nothing against Volkswagen. What if you made a lot of investment in OpenShift? Should I really think about switching and bringing in new tools?
Aaron, you want to take this?
Yeah, that's a tough one. Obviously, I know what we did. For one, I'd say try it and then metric out which is doing better for you, and so you can make an informed decision. Starting small is not that expensive. The problem, though, is the folks working on the OpenShift are really kind of ingrained in that thing. It's hard for them to let go. They're always one feature next from being in production. So kind of as a leader, I kind of had to say, hey, let's try something different. But let's understand how to compare and then actually compare.
That's fair. Yeah. And what would you say about similar question that we had come up about Rancher? Open source concept, kind of intriguing, right? That you can now get some of this in open source.
I would comparing apples to oranges when you compare Rancher to something like Tanzu. I would say Rancher to Tanzu is like comparing an engine to a fleet of high-performing race cars. Yes, a Rancher is a way of orchestrating Kubernetes containers, but that's what it is. It is not a globally consistent turnkey platform that can run any workload on any device in any cloud with high availability and all that. That is extra work that goes on top of something like a Rancher, like Kubernetes orchestrator. There's more to the puzzle. That was maybe one answer I'd provide is like, don't compare apples to oranges. And then the other thing I would say is it really boils down to where you want to focus your limited time and resources. Do you want to focus that on wiring together plumbing? Or do you want to focus that on solving mission problems with software and then letting all of the infrastructure get solved for you by the best of breed Silicon Valley technology and people? Like the best platform and infrastructure engineers on the planet are all working toward building this fleet of F1 racers in this product Tanzu. If you choose not to go in that direction and choose to do something that is like more open, that is a smaller subset of the capabilities that you get, like with something with Rancher, then what you are signing up for is your resources having to cover the delta.
Yeah, it's also to look at your organization too. Like if you got a bunch of tinkerers and you want to go build some monster garage thing that you're going to, compete out back, go ahead and try it out. But if you're like running like the Treasury or, I don't know, the Department of Agriculture, you probably want kind of a global consistent platform that all these Fortune 500 companies are using.
Yeah, all of this is extremely fundamental. There is a mission problem that needs to get solved with software. And how quickly can you take that problem and build out software that solves the problem and get it fully accredited, running in production? Start the clock. How long is it going to take? And how much money is it going to cost?
Had a question come in. Thank you. Had a question come in. This kind of platform is great for greenfield projects. How does this actually work with automating large enterprise platforms like ERP and other COTS systems? It may not be as engineering friendly with this type of pipeline.
Sorry, can you repeat that last question?
I will repeat it. So this kind of platform is great for greenfield projects. How does it actually work with automating large enterprise platforms like ERP and other COTS systems that may not be as engineering friendly with this type of pipeline? And I'll let you know we've got about 3 minutes left. So
yeah,
short.
Okay. I feel like so there. Effectively, where Tanzu is moving, it really has already moved, is toward running Kubernetes as a service with all of the accoutrement around it to run global consistency, high availability, all that. And the beauty of Kubernetes is you can run literally any kind of workload on any device anywhere on the planet with global consistency. That's the benefit of Kubernetes. So I would say that maybe 2 years ago, I would agree with you that the platform that Pivotal Cloud Foundry provided was, for the most part, friendly to like Java developers or developers building greenfield. But today, this platform is literally any workload of any age running on any device anywhere on the planet with consistency.
Got one more question. I think this will be probably our last question for time. Yep. Aaron said they sent 10 people to Pivotal Labs. Mikey said once you got the first small team working, this is about Pivotal Labs, obviously.
Yep.
Mike said once you get a small team working, you can scale up. So as we tackle that 800-person organization, the question is, as you scale up, do you need to send everyone to the Pivotal experience? Is there a less expensive way to grow this over time?
Yeah, absolutely. It's really a matter of investing in your people and then allowing those people to develop a cultural critical mass, and then bringing people into that critical mass and protecting it like a starter dough. Like if you're familiar with like sourdough starter, you don't want to throw your little bit of sourdough at like a bunch of flour. It's all just going to disappear. But if you can bring bits of flour into the dough, then you're growing your sourdough culture in a measurable, consistent way. So no, you don't need to send 800 people to Pivotal Labs. But what you do want to do is, assuming that you take the leap and you send a team to us for say 6 to 9 months, then you protect those people and you bring in more. And our job at Pivotal Labs is we call ourselves pivots at Pivotal Labs. So I'm a pivot, and my job as a pivot is to teach you to be a pivot as quickly as possible. And once you're a pivot, then you can go do what I do, which is train other people to do what we do. And so your job then becomes to train other people to become pivots. And you don't have to do that inside of our space, but it helps to get started in our space. And then you can kind of determine how long you want to cultivate that culture inside of our space. But then once we send your people back out, they are pivots, and they represent all that we represent for you inside your organization, and they can go train up other people.
Thank you.
Yep.
Well, gentlemen, thank you, Aaron and Mikey. Thank you for taking the time and sharing your perspectives. Thank you for all the cool analogies, too. I'll remember those. And thanks for the audience. We really appreciate the questions and keeping this dynamic. Mark?
Awesome.
Yes,
thanks
to our sponsors, Salient, CRGT, and VMware, and thanks Aaron, Michael, and Eric for the robust presentation. A friendly reminder that the webinar will be available on demand in the coming days. Please stay tuned to the ACT-IAC website for more virtual events. Thanks again for attending. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.